everybody. We're here with another week of Unscripted, and this week we have Abby joining us
Hey!
from Raytown Chapel as we get into week 3 of the Reclaim the Table series. So as we kind of get started, what did you guys think of this third week? What was it that you guys, kind of give us a little summary of what it was you talked about this week?
Rob, you want to go first?
Yeah, I talked about Jesus' story where he had met with the Pharisees and they were giving him a hard time about not washing his hands before dinner, and then Jesus kind of flipped it and dropped the bomb on them saying, it's what's in here that makes a difference, not what's necessarily on the outside. So for me, pastors may say this on occasion, but this week I really meant it. The sermon is oftentimes meant for me. I write it for a congregation, but there is so much of me in it. And I think for this week in particular that my challenge was to look deep inside yourself at what needs to be changed or cleansed and how can God help in that. And it's convicting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually use the same scripture, and I too wrote it for you, Robin.
Thank you.
Clean yourself up on the inside.
You got a plank in your eye there, Brian.
This eye, or was it both?
The other one.
Probably both. Yeah.
Probably both.
No, pardon me. I looked at that same scripture. No COVID. And to me, it's such a cringy conversation that he has with the Pharisee. He basically says that they're a dirty, nasty dish, and they do all these things but they don't help other people, and I talked about how if I were at that table, I just want to be like, I don't want to be here anymore, And so, like what Robin mentioned, I talked about, we've got to reflect on our inside and really ask Jesus to help us see, what do I need to clean up on the inside that is an attitude or a character trait that all of those eventually come out, just like what Jesus said. It's in here and it comes out. So.
Yep.
Nice. And then I focused on the parable of the great banquet, which is in Luke 14. And so Jesus is at a banquet talking about a banquet. And this host invites all these people, and they make all these excuses about why they don't want to come. And then sends out his servant to go invite all these other people. And then, so basically, it's kind of talking about who's at our who's at our table, like who's included, who's excluded. And so, I focused on this idea that the table of God's grace is so much bigger than what we can imagine. And so to think about who is on our guest list, whether that be at a physical table or in our life.
Awesome.
That's what I was working on.
Cool.
Yeah, great. And part of the reason we had you join us today is because table ministry is a huge part of Raytown's makeup and what you guys are really working at. Can you kind of tell us some stuff that's going on in Raytown right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a ministry called The Table, and we restarted this back in September. But when we first restarted Raytown back in 2019, I was getting the years all mixed up. We were focusing on this way of bringing people together at tables and having conversations and things like that. And so the table ministry is all about forming community and meeting the needs of food, whether that be somebody who's food insecure or they're isolated and they don't have the financial means to have food. And so with this whole idea is this dinner church idea. And so it takes us back to our roots as Christians. Mm-hmm. The dinner table was actually where ministry happened. So like in our sanctuaries, what looks like a table in our sanctuaries? Anybody?
Ooh. The altar.
Yes! Okay, Brian paid attention in seminary. So when worship started like formalizing, it moved from a table setting to a altar. And so then the priest or the pastor would lead communion from that altar instead. And so then everyone would be in the pews, and it wasn't this dinner conversation anymore. It was the pastors giving a dialogical kind of sermon instead.
Hmm.
And so we're trying to return to the table. So kind of like with this worship series, Reclaim the Table, we're thinking with that ministry, how can we reclaim the table with this ministry that we're doing right now? But COVID, of course, got in the way of that kind of vision. And so we are doing to-go meals. And since September 16th, we have served almost 500 meals with that ministry.
That's so cool.
That's
That
awesome.
is.
Well, and I love that because that's been something you guys have been focusing on for, like you said, since 2019 when you guys kind of got it revamped. And now this sermon series is just really speaking into that. But that's been something you guys have been passionate about for a long time. Like, what's kind of been the history of that over at Raytown?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that several years ago, I don't remember the year, but Karen Schuler, who was over there, she started the table ministry, and
It was during Lent. It
Yeah.
was going to start
Mhm.
out just for the 6 weeks of Lent, but
Yep.
then the response was so overwhelming, and the church got excited, and so they decided, let's keep doing it.
Mhm.
Hmm.
And
That
so they
took
did.
off from there.
It really did.
Yeah.
But it got to be so big that we had to do some things to upgrade the kitchen. There were some things with regard to just code and making sure we're doing it safely. And that's
Yeah.
when we pulled back and redid the kitchen
Yeah.
and then opened it back up in 2019.
Yeah, but then like when we were thinking about restarting after being closed down as a church for so long, one of the first things that we wanted to do was restart the table. And so we had to do that differently. We couldn't bring everybody in around tables. And so we've been doing this to-go way, knowing that we hope to get back to the actual table.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, because right now you're doing, it's like to go. People drive through and they get their meals to go, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Last time we did this, we did tacos, and we could have put Taco Bell to shame. We put out so many tacos in like
You have
half
my
an hour.
attention.
Yeah. Like we probably sent out we sent 96 meals out in about 35 minutes.
What?
That's
So
awesome.
yes.
Wow.
DoorDash.
Yeah, I was about
do
to-
it that fast.
Are you door dashing? Wow.
Wow.
Man.
Yes,
That is
running back and
awesome.
forth from the front door to the cars.
That's awesome.
That's awesome. And just like the need that that's filling too, and those connections that you're making, even though it is a to go, like you said, you're not around that table, but just those connections is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of want to go because you said something interesting. You tied it back to like the early church and connecting it to that early church and how a lot of their ministry was around the table. So like, I guess thinking forward, like when we're out of this sermon series and like, I guess even during this sermon series, like what is it that we can glean about the early church, something we can put back into our own lives today from this table ministry idea?
Mm-hmm. So like the heart of that is that Jesus, when we learn about the Lord's Supper, that took place in the context of an actual meal. Sometimes we think it's just kind of a remove. That's all they did in the upper room.
Mm.
But really, Jesus was having a dinner party with his friends. It was a somber one, of course, because it was like his last meal and everything. But Jesus, like it says in the scripture, like after the meal, he took the cup and took the bread.
Mm-hmm.
And so to remember, like when we're talking in our sermons about reclaiming even the dinner table, about how that can even be a spiritual experience.
Yeah.
And like whether it be with friends or our family, of like, how can I make this a more meaningful like dinner conversation that talks about where Jesus is in my life and how God is active right now.
Yeah, and to me, the context of that Last Supper, it revolved, they were sharing, or they had shared the Passover meal, which for centuries they had gathered together once a year at the table, and they would tell the story of God rescuing them.
Mm-hmm.
And so this concept of not just getting to, the meal is not just about fueling us physically, but to fuel us spiritually, emotionally, to remind us of who we are, where we've been, where we've come, and where we're going. And, so it's all of that sense of story, community, fellowship, dinner party,
Yeah.
Church oftentimes is thought of as this stodgy, you have to sing a certain way and dress a certain way. but that's not at the core what it's all about.
Well, in the Passover meal, what the Jewish people would do is they would incorporate questions into that meal. And a lot of it was symbolic, but to me, it's allowing space for people to ask those questions.
Yeah, that's a good point.
At the Lord's Supper, at the upper room, when Jesus had that with his disciples, that last meal, they asked questions, but it was more about like, who, me? I would never betray you. You know, different kinds of questions. But I think that's a really cool concept. Like, what if we incorporated questions back into our meal time together? That's why we designed those placemats that we have, which, by the way, you can go to our website, woodschapelchurch.org. And if you scroll down to the Reclaim the Table graphic, there's a button right next to that where you can click and download a PDF version of the placemat with those questions on there. So,
cool. Yeah. Well, and I love those too because they're kind of fun questions that no matter who was sitting at the dinner table, they could have an answer. It wouldn't matter if you were sitting at the table with kids or all adults. They were kind of just fun questions for anyone that you were with, which was cool.
Yeah.
Too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So where did you guys get the idea for this sermon series? Like, where did that come about?
God.
There was music, and it was like,
it just came down. Right?
Yeah. The funny thing is, we were like looking to do this series about this time a year ago, and we pivoted from doing and did Mr. Rogers. And so, like, for us at Raytown, I think it's kind of just very meaningful to be doing this right now, especially when we're thinking about what it means to be community. And yes, we long to be at the table and have that community. But yeah, it was really fun to like look this up, and we've used a book, at least I've used a book called Table Talk, and it's by Mike Graves, and he talks about kind of this history of dinner church and of communion.
And originally 2 years ago when we started thinking about this, it was going to be done in the context of World Communion Weekend, which is always the first weekend in October. But just, you know, this concept of on that day, every Christian is celebrating communion at the table. And just kind of this idea of we need to get back to it. And we talked about the busyness of our lives and how the kitchen table has turned into something very different for many families. It used to be the place you never missed. I remember our family, we went on a cruise back when the girls were all still in school. And we told the girls during the day and for part of the night, you can do whatever you want to. You're kind of in a confined area. You're on a ship. But we will eat dinner together every single time. And that wound up being some of the best times for the family. When we talk about it now, we're like, oh, remember that night at dinner? And so just reclaiming that as a culture, as a people. And it's just so foundational to our roots as to who we are.
Yeah.
I love that.
It's been fun to ask like the congregation on Sundays like these questions of like, did you have table rules, and like was eating at a table important to you? Just hearing everyone's different experience with that has been fun.
I know. Somebody on the team, they weren't allowed to sing at the table. Who was it? I don't remember. Somebody wasn't allowed to sing at the table. I don't know. That says something about their singing voice.
Probably.
Yeah, yesterday I talked about being at church camp, and I learned the hard way about not being able to put your elbows on the table. Because if somebody spotted you with your elbows on the table, they would start chanting, Abby, Abby, strong and able, this is not a horse's stable, a first-class dining table. Around the room you must go. And so you had to run around the table and get back to your seat. And if you didn't get back to your seat in time, they would sing again. And so it was, you know, shame on you for having your elbows on the table.
Wow.
Oh, my word.
Jeez.
Yeah,
Church
you
camp,
do
you know.
that.
I guess you would build up more of an appetite after you've run around for a few times.
That's funny. That is funny.
Yeah. So what is it, moving forward with, I guess, this sermon series and also the table at Raytown, what is it that we can be doing to help in this ministry and just be like living into this ministry on a daily basis?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have tons of great support from our Lee Summit campus. They make up a lot of our volunteers and help us donate food. And we thank you so much for that. We cannot make that possible without the help of Woods Chapel as a whole. So we put out usually a needs list of different food items that we need to make that specific meal about a week and a half ahead of time. And so you can contact me. We'll put my email, I'm sure, with this in. But we can get you on the email list of serving opportunities for the table. Some positions need a food handler's license because we don't want to make anybody sick. So we need to know how to hold a spoon, right, Brian? Do you know how to hold?
You just grab it.
You have to do it well.
Right.
So there's certain positions that you have to have a food handler's license, but other ones you can do without. So
I have a question. So what's the age range of being able to serve at the table?
pretty much everybody can do anything. So we've had preschoolers out there, and we've had young at heart people too out there. And so we can find a job for you to do. There's plenty of things, from greeting cars to helping pack the meals to cooking the meals, to helping hand out masks, because we're still handing out some masks right now with that.
What kind of time commitment is it on a Wednesday?
It's usually about 2 hours.
Okay.
So, but you can give as much time as you have available. Usually people start showing up about 4:45 on Wednesdays. We have people that start cooking though on Tuesdays, and make the office smell really nice, and it's hard to work.
I bet.
Yeah.
Now, do the preschool age kids, do they have to have a food handler license?
It depends on what job they have.
Okay.
Most of our preschool people don't have food handler's license.
Okay.
So sometimes I put them on the tally count
All right.
to keep track of how many.
How many
Meals.
cars have come
Yeah.
by or whatever.
Okay.
That's a good
Yeah.
idea.
Good to know.
Yeah, and this is something you can do, like if you've never served, or if you can only serve once a month. It's not something you have to do every week. Is that right?
Yep, that's correct.
Yeah.
So we do this the first and third Wednesdays of every month, and so it's an opportunity that if you have a Wednesday night free, to be able to come out and serve.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It's a great place to do serving as a family or first time.
Yes, absolutely.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, we're about ready. So this next week's going to be the last week of the Reclaim the Table series. So kind of give us like a little, like, what should we be looking forward to this next Sunday as we kind of put this to a close with this sermon series?
Well, I'll be saying we're wrapping up our Reclaim the Table series at one point.
Turkey, we'll be talking about.
Yeah. I haven't gotten that far, Emily.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
So we'll all be surprised.
You
That's
will
right.
all be surprised.
It's still
Yeah.
unscripted right now.
It really
Yes.
is. It really is. I know. It's good save.
Very good. Well, we hope you guys join us on Sunday for the last week of Reclaim the Table, either in person here or at Raytown or online. But until next week, we will see you then.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.